My name's Sheen Towers. I'm currently the Director of Studies for the Metropolitan College of the SRIA, and it gives me great pleasure. This is our March 2025 meeting of the Metropolitan Study Group of the SRIA, and today we are really fortunate to have Geraldine Beskin, once again, who is the owner of the Atlantis Bookstore, the finest occult bookstore in London, with a great history, and we're very blessed to have Geraldine as our presenter today. So I'm going to, with great pleasure, hand over to you, Geraldine, all yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Sheen, and thank all of you. I think you've all come as a genuine surprise to everybody here. Delighted, absolutely delighted. We're sitting in the basement of the Atlantis Bookshop, which was built in 1888. Which was very significant for the Golden Dawn, and Arthur Waite was obviously one of its members, and it's also where Gerald Gardner had his clandestine coven before witchcraft was legal. We have a big history here, but currently we're making history by having 2 tarot exhibitions in London. The Warburg Institute is launching its new exhibition space with one, and they have the Thoth cards from Lady Freda Harris that live there. They have the Austin Spare deck and the original of that. And they also have a Pam A early edition of the A.E. Waite deck. We've lent things to that. And so we then thought there were we've got other things that they might be interested in, and they didn't feel they had space. So we thought, well, we'll show them anyway. And then it kind of grew. So we've got a big exhibition on, and theirs is minimalist and we are the maximalist version of it. So but one of the things that we lent them, and I can only show you a photocopy at the moment, was the first ever article that Waite did about the Pamela Coleman Smith Rider Waite deck. And so that was December 1909. And the cards were in the air at the time. They weren't quite ready. And then by April 1910, we have the first ever advertisement for it, which was again on the progress. Back. Can you see?
Yeah, sorry, I'm just muting that person. Please go ahead. Yes, we can see.
That's
very
good.
clearly.
The Occult Review loomed large in Waite's life for many years. But what made the tarot cards available at that time was that there had been a big change in printing processes, and colour printing was easily available. The Colemans, Pamela Coleman Smith's family, they worked with Tiffany, they worked with Liberty, and they knew the guy whose name I've forgotten, who did all this major colour printing on a vast scale. He even did things for the Houses of Parliament. He some of the big Arthurian pictures there he had done, and so on. And so that was possible. Pamela Coleman Smith was involved with Walter Crane. The artistic movement was very interested in the Japanese work, which has a black outline. Now, Walter Crane was a noted socialist, great friend of William Morris and people, and he did lots of children's books, and effectively, by doing them as small pictures that had a nice black border and a black outline around everything, he invented the comic strip by doing that. Pamela Coleman Smith was part of his friendship group. The kids grew up together, sort of thing. And she then also knew William Morris, and Florence Farr from the Golden Dawn, Annie Horniman from the Golden Dawn, they all used to embroider for May Morris, William Morris's daughter, and they were all so good as embroideresses that they were paid £1 a day, which was really good money then. But that's how the cards were able to happen, and also because of Waite's involvement with the printing world generally anyway. So I have in my hand the first. Don't have in my hand. Hang on, bear with me. I can show you the first ever image that anybody ever saw of that deck. And that's in, there we are. That's in the Occult Review, December 1909. That was on a page on its own, all black and white, life size. And then there are several others that appeared in that same article. And he, if you look at them, he has the first four majors. He then has the 4 court cards going down, and then he has 4 more cards, which make no sense at all. But it's effectively the first ever printing of a reading using that deck. And I've laid out the cards that in our exhibition using our Pam deck, showing that reading for people. And in essence, the article says this pack was inspired. It came from above. We have done the work. We're not interested in the money, and we're sad that our project is finished. Loosely, that's what it means. But it also famously has the cracked back to it, the cracked earth version, as people call it. The first printing didn't last very long at all. They just did a few, and there seemed to have been faults and things, but that was fine. And so they jumped to the crack back, and you have the Pam A and the Pam B decks that were appeared from 1910 onwards. They are determined by the weight of the card that they used. Ours is heavy, and it's a Pam A one. So the cracked earth back one, on Sunday night, I was unpacking some books from the Yarker Library because I'm a trustee of that. And I opened a little Masonic book that was printed in 1905. And what should I see but the cracked back as the end papers? And so that solves the question of why did they use that back? They use availability is why they use that back. So that's our introduction to where we are, what's happening here, and a bit of the background to the cards themselves. But who was Mr. Waite of the Rider Waite deck? As it was known for many, many years, the Rider Waite deck. Rider was the publisher, the Waite was the man that published it. So he was the first man to attempt a systematic study of the history of Western occultism as a continuous spiritual tradition. Now, it took a Victorian to be able to do that in lots of ways, because there were pauses, there was the British Library, there was access made that possible, access from one place made that possible. And it also absolutely suited him temperamentally, spiritually, and in just his whole way of being was all about that. So he was a scholar and a practitioner of the occult, obviously, the secret tradition. He was a mystical philosopher who wrote lots of books and authored the introductions, etc., to 40 more. This man never stopped working. He was a true alcoholic. An alcoholic. He may have been an alcoholic. He did like drinking. In my defence, he did like drinking. He was great friends with Arthur Machen, and they used to invent spurious drinking clubs where they could do silly games and get drunk and have, and justify it. Because he looks like a stodgy Victorian, with a tweed suit and a moustache, but actually he was quite a sweet bloke. Oh, bear with. Anyway, you know what he looked like, so that's fine. But he had an interesting background. His father was a sea captain, and his mother toed and froed by boat to America with him. And then the father was lost at sea when Waite was quite young, and his sister was then born sort of 3 days after the father's ship was lost. So she came from a respectable enough family, but the family disapproved of marrying a sea captain. And so she came back to England, and the family reception was decidedly frosty. She then brought the kids up, reasonably well. I was talking with Bob Gilbert about it. Waite has a very peculiar way of writing things. You think, is it me, or doesn't that make any sense? And you think that in most paragraphs. But I was saying to Bob that I thought that maybe, because he translated a lot of stuff from French, that maybe he was using a French grammatical structure, even when he was writing in England, because he was a man who was a bit like somebody from Fantasia. He's had several jobs on the go at once, and that doesn't work out. That doesn't hold theory. That theory doesn't hold. But it was that he didn't have any formal education. Like he, educated himself to an extreme degree in many things. But he just trying to explain something. He didn't know when to stop digging. he just went round and round and round in circles about it and still didn't tell you what he meant to say. So he also liked to hint that there is a secret school if you contact me. And I think a lot of people would have contacted him for clarification, if nothing else. And then he could have met them and seen whether it was suitable for any of his arcane schools. So his parents were Anglo-American, and Waite's aunt had married Charles Dickens's brother. But anyway, the poor sister was never strong, and Frederica died just before her 16th birthday. And the mother became a devout Roman Catholic, and then became interested in spiritualism. They moved to, I'm tempted to say Kilburn, but it may not have been, but they had a flat so that she could sit at the window and overlook her daughter's grave. She mourned her for the rest of her days. So the teenage Waite then became very interested in spiritualism, but he also had an abiding interest in trash magazines. He loved rubbish to read, and he was the first person really to say, this is sociologically important. This stuff should be preserved. It should be saved. And even at the end of his life, he still had great big bundles of his stuff from his childhood, tied up in brown paper and string, and hanging from the rafters of the basement of his damp house at the seaside. He couldn't bear to part with them. He also wrote for them as a teenager, but we say teenager, there was no set time to leave school then. And so if you got to school until you were 12, you were doing well. If you lasted to 14, then you were really, going to have a start in life. So he then worked where he could and discovered the print world, really. So as a spiritualism, being a mystic, the transcendental nature of the inner experiences of the mystic were far superior to ever having irrefutable proof of life after death, is what he said. And the meetings he attended led him to love in the form of his Theodora. Now, by this time, he's early 20s. Theodora's real name was Annie, but there was a Victorian fashion for changing name and just embodying someone, a goddess of some form, or somebody who from a very famous poem or something like that. And he described her as having, there was no earthly loveliness to compare with that of Miranda, as he called her, with her red gold aureole of waved hair flowing down almost to her ankles, and her star-born eyes, which heaven's grey blue had glorified. He was smitten big time. And this is what she looked like. Oh. Yes? Right? Very lovely. Very pleasant person, creative, artistic. And she worked as a governess for the Stuart Monteith family. And they were very, very pleasant. And this is a country house that they had. They weren't hard up, but this is just one of their homes. But they were so nice and dreamy and pleasant and trustafarian about things that they didn't even standardise the spelling of their own names. They didn't want to upset each other. They weren't that bothered. So you go from governess to the son of the house being interested in wanting to marry her. Meanwhile, she's carrying on with Waite. And then, they were found by a maid in a passionate embrace at 8 o'clock one morning. And they said, oh, no, it's all right. We were drunk. Being drunk was better to being seen having a snog. Anyway, so she said, look, I love you dearly, but I can't afford to marry you. This, I can become middle class here. I can really have a good life and, plenty of dresses and feathers and stuff like that. So he got binned, put in the friend zone, much to his heartache. And so he did the next best thing and he married her sister.
Christmas is going to be uncomfortable.
Yes. So Lucasta, as Ada became known, was very different in temperament. She wasn't as creative, she wasn't as artistic, she was very solidly disinterested in his life and his work and the reality of him. And she...
Obviously her eyes weren't the grey blue of the heavens.
No. She had lots of hair to flow, though, it must be said. So, but they stayed married, and they had a daughter, Sybil, and they were very happy they're very happy in their domestic way together. His real life, though, was out of the house. He was a man who sort of ran 3 jobs at any given time. His major job, his proper wage, was as a manager for Horlicks, the malted milk company, which was massive at the time. And he managed it. He wrote for the magazine. He did whatever needed to be doing. Waite always did it, and they let him. And he then later on joined. His studies were the alchemy, Kabbalah, and the Holy Grail primarily, and the publishers all knew him. He was a workaholic, so they would hire him to edit things and to translate things and to see things through the press and so on and so on and so on. They never stopped him. But then when he retired from the Golden Dawn, which he had joined in a year I've forgotten, but he wasn't member number 99. You see there, it says he'd retired from it with poverty clause, ? Because the publishers, like now, often didn't pay. And he had a wife and kids. No fingers were pointed at Martin at that. Which is tragic, because he really, had a hard life in lots of ways, very conscientious. And the Occult Review that I showed had been bought by somebody who was fresh down from Oxford in the early years of the last century, got bored with it. So it was bought by the person who owned the Timber Trades Journal, which is or Gazette, Bob will correct me, which is a very, very dull thing, unless you're interested in trees. If you want to know how many are chopped down and who's got blight where and what the paper production is and all the rest of it, it's invaluable. But there was always excess paper from the print run. And so the Honourable Ralph Shirley, who had the Timber Trades Gazette, he then set up the Occult Review with the excess paper. And good old Waite edited it, edited the letters, did the reviews, did the roundup of all the other magazines every month. He just carried it on and did everything, basically. But he did thoroughly enjoy it. Oh, this is the joining of the Isis Urania Temple, which is signed by Bullock, Annie Horniman, Westcott, Annie Horniman, Pullenberry, Wing Westcott, and Percy Bullock. So, he knew all the big guys. But the magical stuff wasn't entirely for him. He had a more mystical bent. Aleister Crowley believed that if there was an opportunity to be rude about Waite, then you should take it. And he always did. But he also said in print that Waite was the man who was to be commended for trying to put order into the living history that the West has, and that he was a dedicated and good man in many, many ways. He's just excessively dull. But it was also because Crowley was a magician, and he would have had to look inward for the mystical side of things to work, whereas Waite was all about the mystical to that extent. And so to jump back to the card, for instance, as an example of his working life, when he was effectively editing Occult Review, and in fact doing it whenever Ralph Shirley went on holiday, and seeing the cards through the press and so on. He said that everyone knows that there is a method of divination by cards, and they're used for fortune telling. And he recommends a recently published Manual of Cartomancy by Grand Orient, which was a pseudonym for Waite himself. Right? And he also recommended the Tarot of the Bohemians by Papus, which he had just translated. So it made sales for Rider all the time. The Occult Review was the magazine wing of the Rider Tarot. Why it's called Rider, I don't know. I've never thought of that. And as I say, he also produced at the same time the neat little Key to the Tarot, which we've got on its display here, as an explanation of the tarots that he was producing with Pamela Coleman Smith. And He said, I've embraced an opportunity which has been somewhat of the unexpected kind and have interested a very skillful and original artist in the proposal to design a set. Miss Pamela Coleman Smith, in addition to her obvious gifts, has some knowledge of the tarot values. She has lent a sympathetic ear to my proposal to rectify the symbolism by reference to channels of knowledge which are not in the open day, and we have had other help from one who is deeply versed in the subject. Some say that was Yeats. I really don't know who it was. The resultant for the first time on record is a marriage of art and symbolism for the production of a true tarot under one of its aspects. He means that visually it's correct and that there are other layers of importance he isn't going to deal with in the article, because this was just the teaser campaign for the deck, really. It's being mystical suited young Pamela Coleman Smith, who knew several people on the esoteric scene, and she moved from the outer order of the GD to the inner one by April 1904. Waite Talent spotted her as the person to give public expression to the symbolism and ideals of the order through the tarot cards that they went on to create. Her motto was Quod tibli id auguis, whatever you would have done to thee. And he directed her to produce a deck with an appeal to the world of art and a suggestion of significance beyond the symbols. As he liked that, a suggestion of significance beyond the symbols. She was, she was a jobbing artist. She was very, very creative. She was very sparky. She was very interested in lots of things. She was she wasn't a protege of Ellen Terry's so much as part of Ellen Terry's inner circle. Ellen Terry was the Judi Dench of her age. Everybody loved her as an actress. She worked with Henry Irving for many, many years at the Lyceum in the West End here. And his manager was Bram Stoker, who wrote Dracula. So the three of them together, it was just amazing. And Henry Irving was the first actor ever to be knighted. And one of his costumes when he was being Mephistopheles was a red sort of devilish costume, and that still gets echoed endlessly. But Ellen Terry was gracious. She was rather lovely, and her daughter lived in a lesbian menage a trois with two ladies who lived just down the lane from her mum's house in Tenterden in Kent, and Pamela Coleman Smith was a part of that. And then there seems to have been something that upset her within that. There was a rift between them somewhere down the track, and nobody quite knows why. So he continued editing, writing and publishing, as well as running his orders. And then, I've jumped endless pages here. Yes. Where are we? Right. His daughter, Sybil. Right? She was devoted to him. He was his little helpmeet all his life. They were very, very, very close to each other. And he a year after he wrote the article in the Occult Review about the tarot, he wrote another one, which is Woman and the Mystic Doctrine. And so it may come as something of a surprise to you that he was very interested in sex. He viewed it as a holy sacrament, and he was very, very, very passionate about that. And that article is almost a continuation and slight refutation of a book that Florence Farr had done about the modern woman and her life. And he praises her greatly. And her intentions, where she says that this is to be the woman's century, where she will awake from her sleep and come into her own kingdom, and the vote being rejected will bring social revolution. Well, that's fairly prophetic, I think, really, of her. And it was not respectable for men and women to live together when their tempers were incompatible. I could go on. She did. It's easily found on the net. Well worth a read. Waite then writes of the sanctity of sex between married couples. It must be continued as it began, by mutual consent, by affection and tenderness, without which it is unsanctified. As regards the question of equality, or otherwise, between male and female, man is compared to the written word of Scripture, and woman to the secret doctrine. The directive comes out of the written word and does not subsist alone, but the extended sense, apart from the inward meaning, is the body without life. So he says, it's the course. That's your computer. He continues. It's the course creation of desire, the exaltation of love to its true place as a manifestation of the divine in nature. We shall take part in the natural mystery as we take part in the other sacraments, and forever and ever the outward signs will be transmuted from high to the higher by their inward grace. And he says, sacramental sex is the greatest of God's manifest gifts. Now, who would have thunk that of him? You know, this man in a three-piece tweed suit, you know, woolly underdrawers and a drooping moustache. But how absolutely marvellous to put that in a very popular magazine in 1910. Absolutely brilliant of him. And he loved his Theodora, his always. He got on very well with his wife, although she didn't understand. When he first joined the GD, he said, these people are so secretive about everything. He said, if I'm not back by midnight, tell Scotland Yard to come and get me. You know, they're just ridiculously cagey about who was meeting where, when, and what time, and so on and so on. And you know, it was quite out there to belong to a magical order. It still is in lots of ways. And they were right to be discreet about things. You know, the witches had to be discreet for many, many years as well. And even, you know, people who read tarot cards and stuff, they didn't broadcast it really. You could be a clairvoyant, you could be a mystic, you could be a spiritualist, you could be these genteel things, but you couldn't read cards, you couldn't belong to magical orders. They would, as I say, they were very, very suspect. But I admire Waite all the more for having recently found that article by him, and it opens up a lot of other things that he was could and should have done. But he shaped so much, he produced so much. That was the nice thing. He got it all into print. So he continued editing, writing and publishing, as well as running his orders. And when he was 59, he and Ada moved to Ramsgate and discovered a passion for gardening. And he kept his collection of trashy magazines in the basement, as I say. And Ada died in 1924, and he and his ever devoted daughter Sybil moved to Betsy Cottage in Broadstairs. It's named after Betsy Trotwood, one of Dickens's characters, because Kent was so much Dickens's county in lots of ways. But until very recently, you could Betsy Cottage was being run as an Airbnb. Now it has a long-term tenant in it, very disappointingly. So, but hopefully the man who owns it will change his mind again, and we'll be able to go and stay there, which would be rather sweet. So he lived as a bachelor for a few years, and then he developed a new passion, and that was for one of his students called Mary Schofield, who seems a very pleasant person. Right? Sybil went ballistic. Sybil's nose was put so far out of joint, it was like a cat being taken to the vet. She was not happy. She wasn't having a bar of it. So she complained loudly. And the poor man had to say, I mean, he was 76 by this time, you know, and he said, all is peaceful at Westfield Lodge, all is dreadful at my supposed home, which sounds as though they've been living in sin, you know, for a while. And he'd been trying to appease both women. But he was much loved. He always carried on teaching. You know, his body began to fade on him over the years. So people went down to Ramsgate to see him, and they loved him dearly. They would sit by the fire and he would pontificate, and they would do rituals and stuff like that. And he just seems to be warm, very knowledgeable, very kind and decent towards people. And as I say, his attitude towards women, I think, was absolutely stunning. And so, as I say, it does sound as if he lived in sin before he put a ring on it, but there we are, very modern thinking. And then on the 19th of May 1942, he died. He was aged 84, and this modest, dedicated, clever man who informed, educated and shared his knowledge with thousands, also changed the shape of one of our great unrecognised art forms of the 20th century, the tarot deck, which Stuart Kaplan, who ran US Game Systems and republished the Waite deck in the 70s and created the whole movement around it. Kaplan famously said that he wanted that deck to be the Coca-Cola of the tarot world. And it's been exploited every which way you can possibly think of. It's the smallest deck in the world. It's the biggest deck in the world, and so on and so on and so on. They've run out of different colorways to use on it, I keep thinking, and then they come up with another one. Wisers, rather hideously, produced an all-plastic version very proudly a couple of years ago. They slip slide everywhere. And what a stupid thing to do for an audience that is largely green in its attitude towards things. Plastic, it says, you know, you never need another deck. Well, that marketing terms, that was also stupid, because if you've got a deck that won't wear out, you're only going to buy that deck, you're not going to replace it. And they make horrible noises. You use them, they slide around. They're worse than our current currency, in actual fact. They're awful blooming things. And it's now $1 billion industry, thanks largely to the seemingly soulless Stuart Kaplan. And Pamela Coleman Smith, the young artist he chose because he knew she could do it, is a household name, thanks to the you know, being exploited. And millions have altered their lives on the turn of a card. And the forgotten man, Arthur Edward Waite, magician and mystic, was responsible for it all. So that really is my talk. But there's you know, I could talk about the cards, or there's more to come, or ask me questions, and I'll be happy to answer.
Thank you so much, Geraldine. If anybody has any questions, now's the time. If you could, it'd be very helpful if you could just raise your hand in the chat at the bottom of the Zoom screen. That'll help me to kind of moderate your questions, because we've got quite a lot of participants today.
That's my missing photograph of the dear old soul.
Lovely.
Yeah.
That's great. Lovely to put a face to a name.
Yes, sorry about that. It's because we've taken the screen down because of the exhibition. I had to go kind of old school, but it was more complex than I thought to do that.
So we have Brig. Over to you, Brig. I'm just going to remove Geraldine's pin so that we can see the person who's asking the questions. Just give me a moment. And that's lovely. Over to you, please, Brig.
Thank you, Steve. Geraldine, thank you so much for bringing this character to life. And please forgive my ignorance. I've got on my lap a new encyclopedia of Freemasonry by Waite, but I never knew that he was the first to write a history of the Western esoteric tradition. So once again, please forgive my ignorance. Is there a title of a Waite work that you can recommend that covers an aspect of the history of Western esotericism?
Well, the trouble with Waite is now that he is largely out of print. Because of the difficulty in reading him, because publishers have fashions in what they want to publish and so on. There's the Book of Ceremonial Magic, I think. There's better ones. The person to ask is R.A. Gilbert, because my talk is shamelessly stolen from his work. He wrote the Biography of Waite. He did a lot of work about Waite, and he knows the order in which his stuff was published even. I mean, he wrote a lot on fairies. He wrote plays. He wrote a lot of poetry. He was a very versatile man in amongst everything, in amongst all the series. And you know, running an order, teaching people, dealing with people, and holding down, you know, 2, 3, 4 jobs. And so no, I can't off the top of my head, and I should be able to. I can't think of the one that it would be useful to, I'm afraid. But look, if you, guess there's a Wikipedia page for him. It's bound to be listed there. Take a running stab at that.
Many thanks, Geraldine.
Thank you very much, Brig. And who's next? Anybody at the Atlantis bookstore?
Yes. Oh, Martin's got an answer.
You should start with the real history of the Rosicrucians.
That's the real history of the Rosicrucians.
But there's
Yes.
a lot more.
Yeah, Most Holy Trinity Sophia. There's all sorts of things that he did. It's a very tantalizing list, and it's really annoying that you can't get hold of most of the stuff.
Considering that his writing is quite dense, that you mentioned that he was quite interested in fairies and the little folk. Did he write about those, or was it just one of his little hobbies on the side, or what was his?
Yeah, it's one of the contradictions about the man. His writing was dense. He was scholarly about his things, and yet he absolutely saw the little folk. He loved the fairies. He wrote plays to do with them. He wrote a lot of poetry to do with them. And as with any poet, there's the argument, oh, I think it's rubbish, or I think it's marvelous. Some of it's good, some of it's bad. But in fact, Alan Aldrich, who did the illustrated Beatles, he's dead now, but he still owes me for one of Waite's fairy books. He used to buy so much, I let him have it one day, and he never came back and paid me. But there we are. we don't forget, you know. We don't forget.
I've got a question.
Yeah.
It appears to me that the Tarot Rider, everybody talks about it. What makes it better than the rest? Or what makes it more popular, do you think?
What made it dramatically different to the other tarots was that it was available in England. Most of the tarots at the time were imported from the continent, usually a Marseille deck. And with those, the tarot for years had been like a playing card deck that you got 10 swords, 5 cups, whatever. No clue as to what it actually meant. The Soror Busca, which I can't remember the date of that either this afternoon, was notable in being fully illustrated way back in the day, as it were. And so this deck, Waite gave Pam Smith free rein on the minors. It was the majors that he put his message about the tarot into, and the symbolism there counts for a lot. The minors, he gave her, she could do what she liked with those to some extent, but she illustrated every one. And so
you would say it became more user-friendly.
Absolutely. If you've got somebody lying on the floor with swords in their back, it's not a good card to get. Towers on fire and people jumping out of it. Yeah, another one, hanged man. You can't move in any direction, which is sometimes quite a useful thing, actually. Just ride easy. You've got, what you're doing is good. But so, and then you get the argument about whether you should use the reverse cards or not. Well, you're grown-ups. Into every life a little rain must fall. Deal with it. Be brave. So there are so many myths and urban legends and so on that have grown up about it. But it was a very attractive deck, and you can tell that she could do what she liked in the minors because some years ago we went to Ellen Terry's house in Tenterden to see if any of the backgrounds of the cards were based on the view from her garden. It was an excuse to have a green tea, but it will work, But she did them when she was here. She did them when she was there because she was traveling. She was doing other things as well. And even now, she complained about not being paid enough. I think she was paid £7 or something like that, which back in the day was good money. But even now, I was talking with the tarot producer the other day. The artist who writes the little pamphlet gets the royalties. The artist doesn't. Now that's scandalous. That's scandalous. So I suggested that they form a tarot readers union called the Artists' Palette, and they could be mutually supportive, but actually get some lawyers involved and actually get that changed, because that's a deplorable state of affairs.
Royalties can't be split between artist and author or whatever.
So one's in Bulgaria and one's in Bognor. They never meet most of the time these days. It's not fairly done, and they get paid initially. They get a split, but then they don't get the royalties, and the publishers certainly never suggest it. No, but it's a £1 billion business. That it's
So did Waite not have much to do with the miners at all?
No, he wasn't supported because he had 11 other projects on the go, and also he knew her style. He was pleased with what she'd done for the majors, and everybody takes longer over the minors because you think by then you've done the bulk of the work. Actually, you haven't, but the minors seem a lot more boring to a lot of artists. And also she was traveling. She couldn't dedicate the time in one place to do it, because she had her own very successful career going on at the time. Then she made Stieglitz's name over in New York with her work. It was the first. He was a photographer. It was the first show she had at his he had at his gallery was her work. Every piece of it sold in record time. She just changed things. And she had charm, and she was a storyteller, and she could do a Jamaican accent because she'd been over there variously and told Jamaican stories, which nobody else was doing. And like a lot of people in the theatrical world, she dressed in offcuts from costumes and Liberty prints and things like that. You know, Annie Horniman used to do the same, but she invented the front button dress because she couldn't wait around for a maid to dress her and things like that. But again, Liberty prints, gorgeous materials and stuff, and exotic. So,
Geraldine, it's nice to hear your rendition about Waite and, you know, the sort of inner side of him. He's a gentle guy, he's very, you know, caring, those sorts of things. When you read his writings, he does come across as being somewhat critical of other authors. I wonder, how do you kind of square that with, you know, the inner side of him? What did he particularly criticise?
I think it was clumsiness, and I also think that he meant it. You know, he edited himself by not editing himself, if you see what I mean. There was nobody to check his work. And so he wrote it, and it's probably what he'd said in private, but he then put into print, which is, you know, it's not very elegant of him. It's not very gallant. You know, you might think it, you might say it to your mates in the pub, but you certainly don't publish it. So, you know, that is a black mark against him, really. But I also think that he was trying to warn people that these are the flaws with these other people, because he was so pure and so dedicated to the one path that he wanted people to, you know, join in with him rather than get sidetracked to other things, really. I think it was part of his sincerity that he said that. But I don't think he should have done. Yeah, he never applied for the diplomatic corps, as far as we know.
If I might be permitted to say something.
This is R.A. Bob Gilbert, the great GD historian and Waite aficionado. Hello, Bob.
I'm glad to see that you're still writing works of fiction. Merely, I'd like to correct one or two things.
Please do.
And add a few bits. Firstly, it's a bit unfair to judge him as being somehow sexually promiscuous when his affair with Theodora only really occurred after 1900. And it was that time when he was gallivanting around with Arthur Machen and his lady friend at the time, that they did all this sort of drinking after hours. And it was in the company of those four that the maid came in and found him with sort of the drunken little cat fast upon him. And that was only one-off. But on the other hand, there is a certain degree of reason to believe that Waite's niece may have been his daughter.
Oh.
We don't know, we will never know. So the other things which are rather more important are the fact that the other person concerned with Waite and Pamela Colman Smith, without any question, Florence Farr. If you look at all the various articles in the Occult Review, this is apparent. And if you want to see my summation of it, then throw your money away on the great big Taschen book on the Waite Smith Tarot. And you'll find my introductory article sets it in place historically. I don't attempt to analyze the tarot pack. Other than that, his daughter was known to be neurotic in a clinical sense. Waite put this into his diary, so we know it. His intimate circle knew it, and she was batty as a coot. You may also have noticed in the picture of her that she was actually wearing a little cross.
Yes.
For the from the FRC. It's also interesting to note, you'll see it, she was wearing that because she was an inactive member of the Fellowship of the Rosy Cross. It's also a fact that Waite's first wife did join the Golden Dawn at his urging, but she attended one meeting which he had virtually to prevent her from running away from, and she never attended again. So she was aware of what went on because she'd met the people. Other than that, if you look at his various books, the only one he did which covered all the esoteric tradition was his book on the occult sciences that came out in the early 1890s. What he planned to do and more or less achieve was to produce a series of large works on the secret tradition as he saw it in the various aspects. So he included alchemy, the tarot, the Holy Grail, the Kabbalah, Freemasonry, which you didn't mention, and various other aspects of it. But if you want to get them all together, you will end up with a long line of books, all of them very heavy, because his unfortunate failing, not so much of him as the publishers, he was clearly never copy edited. And I've seen very many of his manuscripts and the proofs of his publications, and there's no indication that anybody else had any hand in them at all. Would have benefited mightily had he had a good copy editor. Now, his articles in the Occult Review are better because I suspect there was an in-house editor. He was never an editor as such, only for the few issues when either Safariel, who was one of the editors, or Harry Strutman or someone like that was actually away. But he did have to write to a time schedule, whereas his books didn't sort of fit into that. So his books, were his own affair, and he could take his time over them. The articles had to be produced in time for the next issue to be printed. So you had to write something concise. It was certainly looked over by the publishers, and thus you get far more from those articles. It is also worth noting that Ralph Shirley made his money out of publishing from the Timber Trades Journal. The Occult Review never made money. It was a loss leader, and he did it because he was personally keen on such things. That's about enough of the things I'm going to comment on. Oh, to add one more thing. My personal opinion of his fairy stories is they're absolutely bloody awful. And if you read them, I'd challenge you to disagree with that.
Thank you very, very much, Bob, because I knew that, you know, as I say, I bow before you, always have done, because you are accurate. I tell a story, you tell a fact. But I did use your work a lot, and I'm very, very, very grateful for it. But thank you for tweaking it and putting me right on those things, because they are important points, all of those. So thank you very much. I hope it didn't raise your blood pressure too much.
I would say that if anyone wants to know anything about Waite and his works, you're welcome to write to me, but I would suggest you do it through Geraldine rather than direct, because otherwise I'll be overwhelmed. I get too many people asking me about the bloody Golden Dawn as it is. Having written for years about it, I'm sick of it. I wish it had never existed. And it still does. I'm still pestered by it.
Although I was talking to a man who runs a big publishing company this week, and he's rather interested in your oeuvre. So I'll talk to you about that another day.
Oh, I've got 2 or 3 people on the go at the moment requiring information, but who don't wish to be told that what they believe is actually wrong.
Ooh,
things like, oh, well, Bram Stoker was a member. No, he wasn't. And no, what the other people think was.
Yeah. No.
It isn't even just casual readers who say this.
It's not repeated lie, but they don't check.
They don't bother to check. We have the address book. We have the order rolls. If you're not in either of those, then you will never remember. Full stop.
Yeah, completely agree.
Anyway, that's enough from me. You carry on with other people who might have less vitriolic comments.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you very much indeed, Bob. I have a question probably for both you, Geraldine and Bob. And that is, you mentioned the Occult Review, that was a passion and that it was edited by Waite. I have a copy here from 1913 with an article written by Waite A Master of the Inward Way, where he talks about Louis Claude de Saint-Martin. And I wonder, because the Rider Waite Tarot archetypes, the major arcana, have become so influential. They've become so iconic as representations of the archetypes of those images that those images represent. What do you think Waite would think of the reach of the influence of the imagery, in particularly the major arcana?
I think it would make his heart glad, because he did that whole project very sincerely, very knowledgeably, and it was visually expressed at long last, instead of just being discussed and talked about and sought for in ceremonies. Here it was tangible at long last. And I think he would be absolutely thrilled. And I think because of the dedication with which they produced those cards, that every symbol mattered to him. I think that they are doing the world good.
I fear I must disagree. I think Waite would be appalled at the way it's gone. He saw the tarot as something worth pursuing, as a set of symbols, archetypes. He didn't have any time for its use in prediction or fortune telling, which he loathed. And he would be appalled at the way it's misinterpreted and the awful proliferation of derivative works that you see around. I think he would be quite happy that people were using it properly, but he would not welcome its distribution as a commercial entity and little else.
No, I completely agree with you, Bob. I absolutely agree. That first reading says it came from above. We've done our job. We did our best, and there's no money. We're not interested in the money or success. We're just, here it is. And it's a numbers game, isn't it? The number of people who are sincere seekers after the inner truths. There's a lot of them who say it, but there's very few who actually do it. And those cards, I think, as archetypes, are really very, very handy. And millions of people use them, but not many people see the inner side that is there. But that doesn't matter. It's never been a mass movement to actually contact the other levels of our lives. And so I think that they resonate on some our subconscious, they resonate in our subconsciouses because they were meant to, whether people want them to or not. To some extent, their inner self is seeing these things represented from head and heart and beyond, and I think they're very important for that. And most people read the tarot, but they don't read it in a spiritual, mystical way at all. I completely agree with you.
I think I would put it as saying many people misuse the tarot because they do not bother to think what it's about. No. One more thing about Waite is that if you look at, I think it was his last one of his articles on the tarot in the Occult Review, he comments on the fact that neither he, well, certainly not Pamela Colman Smith, had any financial interest in it.
That's it.
So they weren't making a profit out of it. The public made money from it.
No.
And it's also interesting to note that some of the imagery is also, in a sense, derived from some of his poetry. The sun, in particular, you find this image in one of his poems of a sort of child on a white horse. And there's also the High Priestess is another one where he refers to this in one of his dramatic poems. And he didn't really write dramas. He wrote poems in dramatic form.
Yeah.
Like Robert Browning's. Done with Arthur Machen. But he wasn't a dramatist and never pretended to be. He was a very good ritualist, but that's not the same thing.
No. No, I'm glad you told me that, because I have no intentions of wading through his poetry to look for those things, and I would never have thought of doing.
I can send you the details, and you can look.
Please, that's different. That's different. Yeah, no, I'll happily do that.
Edition, one of them, which I happen to have a copy, but it'd be very expensive.
Well, I'm sure there'd be a mate's rate, Bob.
It's in my library for the moment. When I pop my clogs, and then you can have a go at it.
Oh, that'll be too long away. That's no good to me.
I hope so.
Good.
Thank you, both of you, for that response to that question. And over to you, Brig. You've been patient. You have your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Shane. Geraldine, why do you think that Waite was drawn to the concept of the tarot from the East when he could have looked at much nearer home, for argument's sake, to the Nordic runic tradition, for want, if you like, of a divinatory system?
I don't think he did particularly look to the East. You know, I can think of pomegranates in there. I think they're about the most exotic things in the cards, really. They seem to be a very sturdy Western, more or less British deck to me. That might be because that's how I've always seen them. But I've never picked up the East in the cards. I might be alone in that. But yeah, I can't place the East in them.
I don't think he had any real interest in Eastern spirituality. He had some, but no great interest in it. And a lot of his material, in terms of the images, he derived in his own way from European alchemy, from the Jewish Kabbalah, and such like sources. He certainly didn't, as far as I'm aware, ever engage with Nordic mythology or Germanic mythology, nor with anything further east than, say, the Middle East. And certainly nothing Islamic, as far as I'm aware.
Thank you both for your observations.
Thank you, Brig. Considering the 22 major cards and the imagery of the Rider Waite deck, and the symbolism that represents the archetypes, how much of an influence do you feel Waite's understanding of the Kabbalah had on the imagery itself?
Oh, I'm sure it's there. It couldn't not be there. You know, when you study something, you put things in, it's sort of by osmosis almost. There will be things in there that he deliberately put there. But a lot of the stuff, it just makes it a whole. It makes the picture hang together. You know, there would be elements that it would be lopsided if they weren't in there. No, I think that was automatic conclusion, really.
Thank you, Geraldine. I completely agree with that. It seems that way. Anybody else, please? Any questions or observations? Feel free.
Even the room is deadly silent.
We do have
Sheen.
Sam.
I've got to go.
Sam.
Yeah. Wait, I don't know too well, but I mean, I find his FRC rituals very complete. He's got a kind of unknown philosopher Martinus set of rituals, also very complete, all very beautiful. I'm just wondering, do we know much about what he proposed for practical, transformation? Was it ritual work, the path of ritual transformation? Was it magical regeneration? Was it more internal alchemy? Is there any suggestion that he maybe proposed a practical system to go with his rituals?
I think it's all of the above, really. You could get a lot from his books, and you could get a lot from his orders as well.
Mm. Thank you, Geraldine.
Okay. Do we have any other comments on that at all? Any other contributions on that note? It's fine if we don't. Can I ask you, Geraldine? I understand that your father, who owned and ran the Atlantis bookstore, would he have had any communication or contact with Waite, do you think, or any of his mentors?
My father wouldn't have done, but our founders certainly would have done.
Hmm.
You know, back in the day, there was Watkins, which is physically older than us, and they were staunchly theosophical in outlook and backed by the Theosophical Society in part until the 1970s or so. We started in 103 years ago this month, and we were always Western and magical and Kabbalistic and so on. And they were the only places you could buy your books, unless it was from things like the back of the Occult Review, which really did, it came out monthly and it really very much kept you up to date with things. So almost by default, we would have known those people. You know, Watkins didn't like magic. It liked mysticism, and it liked Waite very, very much. But we were always considered sort of the wrong side of the blanket, as it were. We were sort of because we had witches and we believed in magic. We weren't respectable until, I don't know, maybe 30 odd years ago, really. So yeah, but everybody knew everybody else. It was a far smaller world, and also there were more groups that, you know, however small, there were more groups, and you know, that did meet regularly and so on, and so that they clustered wherever they clustered. And you've and also people still like to sort of see, hold, smell a book before they buy it. And you know, we're like you guys meeting to here today. The hubbub was great. The fellowship was lovely. All these things, you know, you need centres of places to be. And I like the fact that, you know, he would have been in here. It pleases me very greatly. You know, our door handles have been touched by the great and the good and the disreputable for many years now. But they hold. They've got everybody's DNA on them. I love it. I absolutely love it.
Likewise, Geraldine, I think it's a wonderful heritage. We have someone called Tanner who has their hand raised. Please go ahead, Tanner.
Hi, Geraldine or Robert, would you mind speaking a little bit more about his poetry, whether it was published in different places? I know you briefly mentioned he had the second sight, so whether about the fairies, if it was more in his personal collection that his poetry was later discovered, just anything more about his poetry, please.
Oh, he published quite a few things, really. But it's rather a question for Bob rather than me, because he has an orderly mind.
Apart from being of disorderly habit, yeah. Waite was publishing poetry from the mid-1870s onwards, but most of it is not any good at all. It improved as he matured, and his interesting books are The Book of Mystery and Vision, especially, which had the cover design by Mary Tortel, who was the creator of Rupert Bear.
Yes.
Which is one sort of thing. But there's also the collected poems, which came out in 1914, was published by Rider in 2 volumes, but it hasn't been reprinted as far as I know. It's the major source. He also wrote another book of poetry in the 1920s, The Book of the Holy Grail, which is a poem, a long, long poem. That again, I don't think has been reprinted. But at the time, it was greatly praised by Catherine Tynan and other people who thought it was wonderful poetry. But he didn't, as far as I'm aware, I don't recall any of the poems which are specifically about fairies. About non-human beings, yes, but they were more drawn from the sort of Kabbalistic world, the world of angels, rather than of fairies. So not in the sense of the Celtic fairies. No. But you need to read the poems. And I'm sure if you go to archive, you will find the collected poems, and they can be read and see what you find in them. And if people do read them and come up with ideas about them, I'd be interested to hear it. But his earliest poem was called An Ode to Astronomy, which was published in 1877. And I had the honour, I had the opportunity of having it read out at a meeting of the Bristol Astronomical Society when I was a member of it. And it was uniformly sort of laughed out of court and justifiably because it's a bloody awful poem. But nonetheless, that's where he began. He sent some of his poems to Robert Browning, who said, "Yes, very interesting, but I wouldn't give up the day job if I were you." And Browning was quite correct. Waite was not a publishable poet in any commercial sense. That's all I can say about it, really.
That was me misspeaking, really, the angels for the fairy. But I'm sure there's fairy stuff in.
He wrote fairy tales, but again, they're not very good. If you set them beside George MacDonald, for example, they don't work.
No, MacDonald was gorgeous.
They're dreary.
Yes.
He wrote the, I've forgotten the titles of them now. The one about the Golden Stairs and the other one about Prince Starbeam. And he melded the two together in The Quest of the Golden Stairs, which in my bibliography I described as perhaps the worst book of its kind ever published. And I stick by that. Even though other people said, "Oh yes, they're lovely." No, not if you like anything that's remotely either intelligent or emotionally satisfying. They're just dreary. But then again, that's, of course, it's a personal opinion. Other people may say, no, not at all. And they're quite entitled to those views. But I respect everybody's right to be wrong.
Thank you very much for that, Bob. But you see, he follows in the tradition of Waite.
Yes. Oh, one parting thought.
Yeah.
You're a little unkind about Watkins because they separated any association with the Theosophical Society after the great Soror over Leadbeater. John
I didn't realise it was early as that. I beg their pardon.
John Watkins started out as the sort of literary book-selling agent of the Theosophical Society, but gave it up pretty early on. And from the early 1900s was working independently. He sold theosophical literature, but he wasn't a theosophist. And Geoffrey certainly wasn't. I knew Geoffrey Watkins. And his interests were far more in the Western tradition. But he wasn't hostile to magicians who he had as customers anyway. He just wasn't very keen on selling the stuff.
No, but they also had that perception from a lot of their customers that well, they were mystics. And, you know, the line in the sand is the mystics are the seekers, the magicians are the finders. And they were much more of a mystical bookshop, and we were the magical bookshop. And Mary Tortel, though, who did the Rupert books, it's heresy to say so, but for years I couldn't stand the Waite deck because it reminded me of the Rupert books. I just didn't get it. I just thought, what is all this about? And then, you know, as I matured, I grew into it. I think it's a fantastic deck now because it was I think a lot of the reason why it and the Thoth deck are the two the number one and number two in tarot sales year on year is because they were both created by magicians who knew the significance of every symbol that went into each of the cards. And that's where the resonance is with us. It's not with derivations of them, and it's not with, you know, cards that don't bother with them either. I think that's their greatness that they both gave to the world, really. Frieda Harris did a stunning job, and so did so did Pam Smith. But they were guided by people who knew what they were talking about, and they knew what was important, the important components of each of the cards.
Thank you very much, Geraldine. A couple of things. We have I want to express a big thank you to Toby. If you notice in the chat, he has sent everybody a link to openlibrary.org, where if you click that, you'll find the collected poems of Arthur Edward Waite. So copy them. Yeah. So thank you very much for that, Toby. That's very helpful. And Brig, you've been very patient again. Over to you, Brig.
Shane, I just want to thank Geraldine and Robert for illuminating the life of what I consider to be a much undervalued occultist and theosophical pilgrim. So thank you both.
You.
Here.
There's a bit of worth in Waite, and he deserves, to be rediscovered in lots of ways, or he needs properly editing. Somebody just making the sentences a lot less convoluted, and because there is so much that is genuinely useful in there.
Yes, I'm afraid to say, Geraldine, often there are unkind comments about my work that I require editing.
I'm sure they're unkind.
Yeah, never, never.
Do we have any comments at all or contributions from anybody at the Atlantis Bookstore?
Yes, Martin.
Yes, so I would like to know if anybody here is aware of his involvement with the SRIA. Someone once mentioned to me that he had some contribution to our rituals and sort of did some work on those. Does anyone know about his career or anything?
He ran this study group.
Yes, he ran this study group.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. Martin's asking if anybody knows about his involvement in the SRIA. I know he joined it. And it's hard to think that he wouldn't have made verbal contributions, if nothing else, really. And he joined in it wasn't early days for it, but every organisation has waves of interest and so on. I'm sure he contributed quite greatly, and you're saying he contributed
he ran this group.
He ran the study group as well. Yeah. Isn't that lovely? Isn't that really nice?
Yeah, that's quite correct.
Yeah.
Waite was one of the sort of co-directors of the original study group in the mid-1900s. And there was a great row at the time because, for whatever reason, they decided to get rid of all the lectures and the copies they got. There's only one surviving, of which I have the manuscript of the comments afterwards and the questions. And then in, I think about 1908, I should know it, but I can't remember the date, Waite produced the one paper that was actually printed in the Metropolitan College Transactions, and that was on mysticism again. It's been reissued since, a long time since. But he fell out with the SRIA because he got up to being just about due to be celebrant of Metropolitan College in 1914. And then Cadbury Jones, who was a loathsome individual, stymied him by saying, "You can't become a celebrant unless you believe in the historical reality of Christian Rosencreutz." And Waite said, "This is nonsense." And unfortunately, Westcott was too weak at the time to stand up to Cadbury Jones, because Westcott didn't believe in the historical reality either. And so Waite left, he resigned and quit. And his remarks about the SRIA in the Brotherhood of the Rosy Cross are, to put it mildly, a little unkind. He fell out with them, not with it as a society, but with the individuals who he mostly looked upon as being worthless. It's interesting to note that a good many of the members, the male members that is, of the Fellowship of the Rosy Cross in the 20s and 30s were also active members of the SRIA. And this is something to bear in mind, that the SRIA is not an overriding autocratic body, or wasn't anyway, and so the people could do as they wished. I won't go into anything about more recent history of the SRIA because that would be inappropriate.
I was a member of the Fellowship of the Rosy Cross, and it was a great honour because they debated for 17 years whether to let women in and whether women had ever been a part of it. And then Bob had a word with the wonderful Marjorie Debenham, who was my guide and mentor in lots of ways, thanks to him. And she said, "Well, of course I was a member. I joined in 1947 or whatever it was." And so they let me in. And it was great. I'm a rotten ritualist because I'm fairly ambidextrous and I can never tell which way to turn. But they suffered me. And it was wonderful. It was wonderful. Very, very beautifully written rituals.
I would make one correction there. Miss Debenham and her sister were members of the FRC in the 1920s.
I beg your pardon. Yes.
And she was officially a member until the 30s, and I suppose until it closed down, because they used to meet in the headquarters of the Debenhams Masonic group.
What the ancient free and accepted?
The particular version of the rite that they ran.
Ah. Oh. I was only out by 20 years, odd years. So anyway, it was a great honour, and they were beautiful rituals to work. They were super. And Charles Williams was a member, wasn't he?
He was, but he got unhappy with the way it was going, and he left.
That sounds like Bob's just been discreet. I think there's a whole backstory there.
Because I don't believe in spreading all the sort of, not exactly dirty washing, but on the inside story of the fellowship when it's unnecessary.
Go on. Go on then, Bob. Tell us all.
No, I don't intend to do anything of the sort.
I'll give you chocolate biscuits.
The way it's been and the way it is now, and I refuse to comment on it.
Okay.
I personally really value and appreciate that you choose not to. Unfortunately, I think that when talking about those kind of issues, we're talking about the personal politics, interpersonal politics, and sadly, I think that that's a very disruptive factor. Probably has been in many different societies and spiritual organizations throughout their existence. That people involved, particularly the ones who have deeper insight or experience or have studied to quite a depth various subjects of interest, that they tend to fall out with other people who also have experience and a depth of study. And I think it's a great shame when that happens. It kind of, in my opinion, it kind of falls short of the kind of example that should be set by somebody who has integrated spiritual understanding into their being to end up at odds in an interpersonal way with something which should, in my opinion, transcend those kind of problems. I'd welcome your thoughts on that.
I completely agree with you. But I've also noticed in groups that when people work very closely and in an exploratory and experiential way, they are closer than brothers. And then that particular working or that particular phase of workings comes to an end, and there's a schism. And it's because that white heat of closeness that they had created that, and it got and it became historically possible to do. And then after that, you need a pause from each other. And the trouble is, we never do it elegantly. I think it happens in offices as well, when people push to get a project through, and they live in each other's pockets, and then the team splits up and they see the flaws in everybody else's work or everybody else's character. I think it's the nature of intense working as much as anything else.
Happens to bands.
Well, I would add to that.
Yeah, happens to rock bands. Yes, absolutely. Yes.
I'll add to that. You should bear in mind what is required of Freemasons, that if you're at variance with a brother and you can't agree, one or both of you withdraw from that particular meeting. Now, if that applied as it should in esoteric societies, we'd have a lot less problem.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
Totally agree.
And people say, I'm sorry, I was a bit het up, I was an idiot. That also helps, you can apologize and without losing face, I think, as well.
I think that people who are capable and choose to apologize are the ones worthy of respect.
Mm. Yeah.
So please feel free, anybody else. We have a wonderful opportunity here to ask questions and gain more of an insight through Geraldine and also Bob as well. Please don't be shy. Feel free. Step forward.
Loads of A.E. Waite decks, various remakes, and by different producers. What do you recommend as a sort of starting deck?
I mean, being asked which of the various iterations of the Waite deck is the best one to get.
From spiritual progression purposes.
The one you like. It's that initial response that is the key to the door to that extent. And it's the same with any tarot deck. Just go with the one you like. Because for every 10 people who say, oh, it's absolutely marvellous, there's another 10 who say it's absolute rubbish. Make up your own mind and you'll know. And they say, like, my journey through the Waite deck has been quite interesting, really. You know, I didn't like it at all for decades. And then I found a deck that I did like. And then they did the commemorative one where the colours were more muted. And that took me out of my living room to 100 years ago. And that's a nice, easy start then. It's not me and the cards, it's the cards that I'm looking at. And then a couple of years ago, I got a radiant deck. Bright, shiny, you know, really crisp, very, very, very different. And they're great for different moods, even different questions, obviously. But no, always go with your gut. No. And instinct first, reason second. Without instinct. Yeah, but we have this big exhibition up. Somebody on Monday bought 200 decks of tarot cards, which wiped us out, except for the weights. We held on to those because we had to have something on the shelf, and because it was so useful. It's in many ways, you know, and I swear we only had 20 decks left, and we've sold about 50 this week. I don't know where they're coming from, and the cupboards are empty, and people are still finding tarots to buy. I'm lost. I don't know. It must be magic or something, quite genuinely, because we haven't got stock. Thank
you.
My pleasure.
Just to let you know, somebody, Olwyn, thank you very much, in the chat, has just left a Dropbox link to a few pages of some of A.E. Waite's book of poetry, Strange Houses of Sleep. So there's another one. Copy that link, and then you can download that and read that yourselves.
You're taking you down memory lane now. Yeah, thank you for that. I think I enjoyed it the first time around, the bits and pieces that I read, because also when you're young, you don't know what is good and what is bad, just how much you like it, if you see what I mean. And I always had a fondness for the heavy Victorians, and I learned the Wreck of the Hesperus and things like that by heart, and I like, you know, Mrs. Gaskell and all the you know, the Victorians. You get a lot of words to the pound, as it were, and I liked all of that when I was younger, and so I enjoyed Waite at the time. And also when you're young, you don't understand most of what you're reading, but you get something from it. No, and that's enough.
Hasu, over to you. You have your hand raised. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Very interesting conversation. A very simple question. Is occultism now becoming redundant and AI becoming the master occultist?
No, we're cleverer than AI. No. Because it doesn't have a soul. It doesn't have an inner life.
Feeling. It has no feeling. It's just a data harvest.
Yeah, it has no aspiration. It can only do what it's programmed to do. You know, it's very sterile in lots of ways. It might be able to reproduce itself, something like some horrible bug, but that's kind of all it can do. No.
Is that a very positive, convincing thought? Or, as I said, AI is doing everything virtually now, so why not become an occultist, a tarot card reader, and a creator of tarot cards? Because remember, those who live on the internet will believe that system to be more correct than someone's book that's written 100 years ago.
Yeah, but we all believe what we're told when we access it. I only believe what I believe up until this point. I could have an amazing revelation on the bus home tonight and change my life. We're all at that stage. And it depends how you get your information.
Yes.
But really, the AI is based on previous people's work.
I think it's possibly relevant to point out something I was going to say earlier, is that Waite thought of the title, Strange Houses of Sleep. When he didn't think of it, it came to him. He was going home on the bus, and suddenly this came into his head. So that wasn't AI, that was inspiration.
Yes.
And if you read it, the poems fit beautifully to the title. But I would again recommend that you read the original rather than the poems as they appear in the collected poems, because he did rewrite a lot of them for that.
Right. And the other thing I feel as an occultist is we might have the bright orange forces of darkness ranged against us, but our job is to walk resolutely towards the light. We are meant to be the beacons that shine in the darkness.
But isn't darkness just our own fears?
Is darkness?
Our own fears.
Yeah, but it can also be your reality. But it's up to you to think, no, there is always, always, always that spark that is unquenchable.
So Waite, in a way, was trying to quench that reality as such and attach himself to the thinking process outside rather than within himself.
No, I think he was trying to go within and upwards, as it were. He wasn't by any means spiraling downwards into the darkness, no.
That's very interesting, because the article that's written by Waite in the Occult Review that I have just here is about being a master of the inward way. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, both of you. Bless you.
Thank you very much, Hasu. There's a wonderful comment here from Toby in the chat regarding AI and whether or not AI has a soul. I think he's commented on. He says, I still say please and thank you to AI when I make a request, just in case.
I made a friend once by accidentally having to stay with him in darkest Wales. We didn't know each other at the time, but we sat up literally all night fighting over whether everybody was entitled to a soul or not. That turned out to be a very good question. He got drunk, I got annoyed, and it was wonderful. We loved it. Yeah.
That entitlement to a soul from the off, or was that entitlement to be able to give it away?
We didn't. I don't know. No, we just concentrated on whether you were entitled to one, in the first place. Yeah.
I think those kind of conversations are wonderful, and it reminds me. There's a quote apparently by Emanuel Swedenborg. It's one of my favourites. Opposition is true friendship.
Yes. Well, it bonded us. That's for sure. Yeah.
Sam, over to you again, my friend.
Thanks, buddy. Again, Geraldine, thank you, first of all, for this wonderful talk. I'm enjoying it so much. This question might be for Bob Gilbert, for one of you two. There's actually two questions in one. It has to do with Waite's investigation of Robert Falcon's claim to having a secret chief. And I know Waite ended up interviewing Rudolf Steiner. He's very curious about what's really behind Falcon's claim, because after the GD split, of course, people were racing to have their own secret chiefs, and Falcon went and did that and used Steiner to sort of fulfill having a Rosicrucian connection in Germany. And one of the things, these are from my old notes, so I'll just have to quickly describe what it is. So I've written basically Waite eagerly wanted to interview Steiner to find out what Falcon had told him, if it was the truth and so on, about having a so-called connection to a continental Rosicrucian order. Now, Steiner apparently agreed to meet Waite, but with some conditions. One of these conditions was that Waite could not ask questions about Rosicrucianism to Steiner. This was apparently due to Waite's previous refusal of Falcon's offer that he should partner with Meakin as being one of two representatives of Steiner's Misrium in England. Waite's refusal was apparently tied to him not accepting Christian Rosenkreuz as a historical individual. So my question there is that accurate? Was Waite, given this condition, when he met with Steiner, that he should not interview him about Rosicrucianism, because I have no reference for this. I've just been told and I've written it down in my notes. Secondly, so that might be for Bob Gilbert. Secondly, what was Waite's take on the secret chiefs? Because Waite obviously has created higher degrees for his FRC. I think he calls it the fourth order. In some Golden Dawn groups, this was taboo. You don't have grades beyond 7-4. There should be nothing higher. This is not for embodied adepts. So is the claim. Whereas, of course, Falcon did go up to grades 8-2, 9-3, and obviously so was Waite as well. Paul Foster Case, on the other hand, is describing a true and invisible Rosicrucian order rather than attaining or talking about real people to work with in Germany, let's say. So I'd like to know what Waite's view was on so-called secret chiefs, or was there anything that was meant to be positioned above his work and his order, or were his higher degrees actual spiritual states? What was his position there on the unknown superiors? And firstly, back to my question, is it true that Waite was restricted in his interview with Steiner? I don't know if you guys know. It's a tough one, maybe.
Well, I can tell you something about that. I've read most of all that was available of what Waite recorded of his meetings at that time. And he certainly did have more than one meeting with Rudolf Steiner. But nothing I've seen suggests he was not allowed to talk about Rosicrucianism. He may actually have not asked about it, but it wasn't because he was forbidden to. And as for Falcon, Waite had little time for him because Falcon never produced a scrap of evidence that he'd met anyone who could possibly be considered a secret chief during his jauntings around Germany, which were cut short by the outbreak of the war. And Falcon was a fantasist as well, not quite at the level of Westcott, but not far short of it. Waite, I don't believe, ever accepted the reality of any kind of material secret chief, or of there being any kind of higher order of beings below God, but perhaps above that of angels, from whom he would get secret or private information. It's not the way he thought. As to the question of higher degrees, he felt, Waite that is, that one could progress beyond the 7=4. But I have my doubts, not that it's impossible to try, but I think it would be very unwise to try, because you're entering a realm where you're risking damage to your own personal spiritual integrity. That's my view of it. I wouldn't want to be involved in trying to do some of Waite's final rituals, of which I have copies, because they seem to me to be bordering on the impossible. I don't think he ever tried them, but he wrote them on the possibility that they could be worked, I suppose. But what kind of state you would need to be in even to enter such a grey, let alone complete the working of it, I can't understand. And unfortunately, Waite didn't ever answer such a question.
May I ask you, please, Bob, what would, in your opinion, be the hoped for reason or outcome for Waite of authoring such ceremonies and rites?
I think
why would he do that?
I think he felt it was possible to carry on the progression of mystical experience beyond what is obviously tied still to this level of existence, in ways that the mystical progression as you find it in anyone who's written about the stages of mystical experience within a Christian context will show you that you need to have years and years and years of practice of these things. The idea that you can suddenly become a contemplative and you can suddenly see God just doesn't work. You need a lifetime to go through all the personal inward training, not being imposed upon you by other people, but just to get yourself ready for experiencing that otherness, that approaching the vision of God, let alone union with God, could be. And I don't believe, even if you could do it, that you would be able to transmit the understanding of it. And I think it's very unwise to suggest to people, here is a path you could follow, this will take you up to the vision of God. It's not how it works. Waite himself says in his Lamps of Western Mysticism that if you get into this mystical state, you can only say that you're in it and then you're not in it. And you come back with a sense of loss, but also with, as he said, the yoke of the kingdom upon you. You know, you don't freeload. You come back with a responsibility to transmit what you can to other people. And I think it's a mistake to try and include in what you're transmitting the sort of practical way of achieving this. That's really up to the individual to discover themselves, because I think it differs from person to person. And you will know if you make use, true use that is, of real contemplative prayer, you will be guided towards that. But it's a personal discipline which is extremely hard. And I think most people are not going to live till they're 200 or 300 years old. They feel they're able to do it. Again, that's my opinion. I don't lay it down as dogma.
Bob, thank you so much for that. The last few minutes of what you said there, for people who are watching the recording of this in any point in the future, I really encourage you to listen back to that several times. That was wonderful. And thank you very much, Bob. I really appreciate you drawing attention to this. I think that there are many people who veer toward, you mentioned people being fantasists. And I think that sometimes people have such an elevated sense of their own self-accomplishment in the study and practice of the mysteries that they end up with a tendency of wanting to be the star in their own movie. And so they practice imagination, and their imaginations can run away with them. And before you know it, they're believing that they're receiving direct contact with archangels and so on, when really all they're actually doing is exercising the imagination, and that's running away with them. But I agree, if a person does have such a transcendent experience, then when they come back, it naturally manifests in their being with a greater awareness of the value of service and responsibility. So yes, thank you. Any comments on what Bob just said there, please?
Okay. Other than it was well said, and also now people want to do things. You know, I've studied this for 3 months, therefore I've achieved this stage of things, and it does make you think, who needs AI when you've got these twits, you know, with paywalls? It's you know, it's rather worrying. You know, anybody who can talk for 4 hours without drawing breath is not as in contact with good things as they think they are. You know, don't waste your life on them.
Here. So anybody else? Feel free, step forward. Okay, what about people at the Atlantis bookstore?
No, they're all still awake. And we seem to have a male-female divide going on, weirdly. But no, I think we're about run our course here now. I think Waite has thoroughly enjoyed it. And Bob's contribution, from my heart, Bob, it's been obviously massive, but I'm very grateful to you for tidying up my talk. I really do appreciate it.
Likewise, I echo that. Thank you very much indeed, Bob. It's wonderful to hear you speak on these subjects. And Also, on behalf of the Metropolitan Study Group of the SRIA, a huge thank you to you, Geraldine, not only for your presentation, but for allowing us to hold our meetings, in-person meetings, in the basement of the Atlantis bookstore. It's a wonderful, wonderful, there's such a heritage in that place and such a spirit. And it's wonderful that you have allowed us in to gather and to share in our mutual studies together in that space there.
Well, thank you very much, because it is genuinely a pleasure. Barley and I very much believe in hospitality and fellowship and scholarship. And you guys fit the bill beautifully, much to your shocked looks on your faces, but you do. So no, it's a mutual thing. It is a mutual thing. It is lovely. So long may it last. And I also think that Waite's little face is smiling a bit inwardly and outwardly now. I think he's had a thoroughly good afternoon of this. You know, he's been acknowledged for the worth of the man, instead of just being exhausted by work and having to teach and, you know, so on, and his complicated home life. So no, I think we've done him proud this afternoon, I think, and I say largely for the I know the solidity of Bob's work was what made it proud, but I did put a little bit of flesh on his bones, so it's good. So it was a pleasure.
Lovely. Thank you, everybody at the Atlantis bookstore, and everybody who's joined this call today from all around the world. Love to you, love and peace all around. And thank you for taking the time to participate in this meeting. And yeah, most of all, a big thank you to you, Geraldine. And sending you all lots and lots of love. Have a wonderful rest of your weekend. And yeah, I look forward to next month, and we'll meet again and continue our mutual study of the hidden secrets of nature and science. Thank you ever so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. See you all.